First, let's quickly examine some statistics regarding soybean export volume, farm income, and farm bankruptcies. 40% of the January 2019 soybean volume was shipped to top buyer China, which is below the 2014-2018 average of 62%. March 2020 USDA data shows 3.2 million tons of soybeans shipped in February, which would be a 14-year low for the month. The USDA projected net cash income for 2020 has so far totaled $89.9 billion, down 2% or $2 billion from 2019. If realized, the remaining net cash income would be the second lowest over the last decade, behind only 2016's $88.4 billion and $18 billion below the 10-year average. Data from the U.S. courts reveals that for the 12-month period ending September 2019, Chapter 12 farm bankruptcies totaled 580 filings, up 24% from the prior year, and the highest level since 676 filings in 2011. Now let's hear from farmers across the nation regarding their views on the impact of China tariffs and how they feel about President Trump. We've dealt with declining prices before, but it hasn't lasted this long before, Katie Schultz says as she walks through the barn at Trifecta Farms, the 400-cow dairy farm she owns with her two siblings just outside of Fox Lake. The U.S.-China trade war added insult to injury during a difficult period for farmers, she says. It was already not great times and not great prices. I won't sugarcoat that. We struggled. We struggled with everyone. Miss Schultz doesn't say who she voted for, disclosing only that her siblings were divided at the ballot box. I don't care if they're Democrat or Republican. I just want to know that they're rowing in the same boat that I am. Farmer Lorenda Overman and her husband are among those impacted by commodity prices tumbling in response to the new tariffs on soybeans and pork. They own a farm in Goldsboro, North Carolina, where they raise hogs, soybeans, and more, much of it now targeted in the mounting tariff fight. Overman estimates it could end up costing her hundreds of thousands of dollars in income over the next year. This month, after exhausting their credit, Miss Overman and her husband had to borrow on their life insurance to pay the bills. I'm feeling more like this short-term pain is already long-term pain, she said. We need some stability. We need some action, and we need it now. North Dakota wheat farmer and vice president of the North Dakota Farmers Union, Bob Koylan, provided a dramatic example of the trade war's effect on American agriculture, citing $400,000 in losses since Trump took office. Trump is ruining our markets. No one is buying our product no more, and we have no markets no more. A farmer of 40 years standing, Koylan did not vote for Trump in the last election. If he doesn't lose 100% of it from the farm belt, then people are kind of crazy because this is not going well for farmers at all. I mean, some of them are trying to be faithful. They made that decision and voted for him, but I would have to say in the back of their minds they are just not very happy right now. Pennsylvania farmer Richard Byrd of Fayette County has about 600 acres of soybeans, and a good portion of those beans end up in China. Regardless of whether the beans stay home or go overseas, Byrd says he gets the same price. That price dropped dramatically as soon as China imposed tariffs on farmers in response to President Trump's tariffs on steel. We went from $10.30 a bushel down into the $8 and eventually the $7 range, Bird said. It's just been absolutely horrible. In 2018, Pennsylvania farmers shipped $354 million worth of products to China, a 14% drop from 2017. There was another 35% drop in the first quarter of 2019. If China sneezes, I catch a cold, Bird said. This may be the end. Yet Bird is unwavering in his support for Trump. The president is doing what he has to do. After China made its announcement that it would stop importing U.S. agricultural products, American Farm Bureau Federation President Zippy Duvall said, China's announcement that it would not buy any agricultural products from the United States is a body blow to thousands of farmers and ranchers who are already struggling to get by. Farmers and ranchers are grateful for mitigation payments, but let's be clear, those payments do not make them whole, especially with additional challenges from Mother Nature. Many farmers and ranchers cannot withstand continued uncertainty in trade. We must restore and expand markets. In March of 2019, President Trump announced on Twitter that he was ratcheting up the trade war and threatening to impose even stiffer fines on almost all Chinese imports. That tweet cost me $40,000, said Shane Goplin, a sixth-generation farmer in west central Wisconsin, explaining that the price of a bushel of soybeans plunged by more than 10 cents after the president's threat appeared. Every penny in the market is tens of thousands of dollars for me. It makes me feel really good to hear Trump say farmers are important to this country, he said. That's what makes me want to stick with the president. And while he hopes the trade fight is settled soon, he doesn't think trade is the silver bullet that is going to solve the farmers' problems. Trump abruptly escalated tariffs on $200 billion of Chinese goods in March 2019 and opened the door to even more, prompting Beijing to hit back by raising the tariff rate on $60 billion of U.S. items. The President of the United States owes farmers like myself some type of plan of action, said John Wesley Boyd Jr., a soybean farmer in Baskerville, Virginia. Farmers were his base. They helped elect this president, and now he's turning his back on America's farmers when we need him the most, he added. We're in trouble. The prices have dropped dramatically and we don't see any end in sight, says Boyd, who is also the founder and president of the nonprofit National Black Farmers Association. It's planting season and President Trump announced some additional tariffs, and we haven't gotten over the effects of the first ones, you know? I think a lot of farmers are going to be on the auction block. Things were starting to look up a little bit, and then all of a sudden there was talk of tariffs coming along, and that just took the prices back down, said Chris Pollock, a fifth-generation farmer who owns 160 dairy cows at a farm near Ripon, Wisconsin. Just a $1 swing in milk price for my farm is $45,000 a year, he said. That's $45,000 that I could have reinvested in equipment or other supplies. Pollock said he put off a grain storage project for 2 or 3 years waiting for prices to go back up, but finally just decided to get it done for the sake of his own mental health. This year I finally said we're going to do it. I don't care, he said. When you can't feel like you're making progress, at least at some point, or you're actually going backward, it really is hard to get up in the morning. Megan Dwyer, 30, is a fourth-generation farmer in Illinois. Both she and her husband Todd have off-farm jobs to help pay the bills. Our day begins at 4:30 a.m. with cattle chores, hopping in tractor cabs, checking fence lines, baling hay, making sure cows have water and plenty of grass, she says of their 700-acre operation that grows corn, soybeans and alfalfa, as well as beef cattle. 2/3 of their soybeans are exported to China, so the trade wars have really hit home. To me, that's the biggest concern and scary part is that the longer this drags on, they're finding a new market, and how we get that relationship back is troubling, she said of Chinese soybean buyers. Dwyer voted for Trump, and despite the uncertain climate, she says she'd vote for him again. Agriculture, she admits, has become an easy target for retaliation. China knows that this is a big industry and commodity for the U.S., and so it's an easy push button back. And it's unfortunate. But I also don't feel like I'm blaming the president for my situation, she said. Ohio soybean farmer Christopher Gibbs said the trade spat meant he would not vote for Trump again. He told CNBC, "I was a Trump voter. I voted for the president, but he certainly hasn't come through. He has lost on trade." He criticized Trump for taking all our markets away from us, and that it's kind of like telling all of America to throw away all its 401k plans. "I'm not going to vote for the president, and I'm on record for saying that," says the former Republican county chairperson. "I don't believe it until the crops are on the boat. This is deja vu all over again," he says about Trump's claims that China will make $40 billion to $50 billion worth of agricultural buys. He's done that before. Somebody has to speak truth to power a little bit, he says. "We're certainly hoping that this trade dispute is temporary," said Brian Watkins, a 56-year-old farmer from Kenton, Ohio, who farms about 8,000 acres of corn and soybeans. "If it carries on, if it goes on long enough that the countries find alternate sources, that they encourage production in other places, once those investments are made, then that competitive environment changes. Then all of a sudden we're in a very oversupplied situation," he warned. "We've seen somewhere between a 10 and 20% price drop off our gross sales. And which given the profit margins we have, that's enough to take a majority chunk out of our profits right there," said Watkins. Roger Johnson of North Dakota, president of the National Farmers Union, the nation's second largest general farm organization, said that Trump's latest tariffs would hurt American farmers, a large part of his own voter base. Trump announced in a tweet that he would be stepping up tariffs, adding 10% on top of the already 25% tariff on Chinese goods. Markets plunged on the news. "Trade policy is not a game. It has real and serious consequences for rural America," said Johnson, adding, "Immediately after Trump tweeted his tariff threats, already low commodity prices slipped yet again. But the long-term implications for our country's reputation as a reliable trading partner are likely to be even more damaging. It may take President Trump just a few minutes to write 280 characters, but family farmers and ranchers could be dealing with the fallout for decades to come," Johnson said. Iowa farmer Tim Bardole survived years of low crop prices and rising costs by cutting back on fertilizer and herbicides and fixing broken-down equipment rather than buying new. When President Donald Trump's trade war with China made a miserable situation worse, Bardole used up any equity his operation had and started investing in hogs in hopes they'll do better than crops. A year later, the dispute is still raging and soybeans hit a 10-year low. But Bardole says he supports his president more today than he did when he cast a ballot for Trump in 2016, skeptical he would follow through on his promises. The significant financial harm done to soybean farmers will not be undone with the signature of a Phase 1 trade agreement, Iowa Soybean Association President Tim Bardole said in a December news release. The impact of nearly 18 months of lost sales to a country that consumes one-third of U.S. soybean production will not be made up anytime soon. Alec Amundsen, an Iowa farmer who has been farming for 4 years, said the MFP payments have helped, but they are not enough. He and friends often joke about the Trump care they are getting, but that he would rather earn money through trade and not aid. The ripple effects have been felt throughout Osage and surrounding areas. Amundsen said churches are seeing fewer donations, and farm equipment dealers are seeing fewer profits. Nationally, farm bankruptcies have gone up. Even in our business of selling equipment, we haven't sold as much of the big stuff as we used to. It's all been smaller sales. People aren't looking to spend money unless they can really justify that expense, or they made a small profit and have decided to upgrade technology, said Amundsen. A lot of farmers I talked to voted for Trump because he was going to be tough on trade, and they want to see that through, said Amundsen, noting that the recent announcement of a Phase 1 deal has buoyed support for the president. There were also a lot of people within the last couple of years who've said, you know what, maybe we should have stayed out of this trade battle. This is probably the most difficult time in my farming life on making decisions to market corn and soybeans, said John Geiselson, who has farmed corn and soybeans in Iowa for 45 years, including during the 1980s farm crisis. Geiselson said he was flabbergasted by how many people still support Trump, despite their finances taking a direct hit due to the trade war. He does not understand why he should thank Trump for attempting to replace the income that he took away from farmers through market facilitation program payments. Geiselson said he also often tells fellow recipients to consider what that money was otherwise earmarked for. Tariffs have crippled us and will cripple us for years, said Geiselson. At that time, trade negotiations were moving along, and it wasn't looking that bad, said John Heisdorfer, an Iowa farmer and chairman of the American Soybean Association. Instead, China's 25% tariff on U.S. soybeans remains in place and trade tensions are rising. Beijing announced in August 2019 that Chinese companies would stop buying all U.S. agricultural products. For 30 years or longer, farmers have put money into trade and the federal government has done it too, Heisdorfer says. And yet with the swipe of a pen the trade is gone. The timing is so bad. McKenna Green, 18, says she is not going anywhere. As the sixth generation to grow up and live on her family's row crop farm in east central Illinois where they grow corn and soybeans. A member of the FFA and a dedicated farmer, Green has been closely watching the tariff wars over the past few years. Green has had to learn a lot about tariffs and trade to understand how these global economic negotiations are affecting her family's livelihood, and to speak out with an educated voice. When China raises their tariffs, it costs more money to market a product to China and vice versa. In reality, nobody wants to pay that extra money, which in the end closes off the market, notes Green, who stresses that she agrees with President Trump's trade approach, but not his timing in an already fragile agriculture economy. Right now, the prices are so bad that many farmers are not even making their break-even prices, meaning they are losing money on their crops. Farmers are struggling, big time. In the beginning, the idea that we would get better prices and deals for our exported goods was something that many farmers in my area believed could be a good thing. At this point, though, farmers are losing hope. Joel Greeno, 52, grew up on a dairy farm in Monroe County in west Wisconsin. It was pretty much assumed he would continue the family tradition, he says. In 1990 he did, buying a 160-acre dairy farm and 48 cows of his own. But after 20 years of business, staring down economic ruin, he was forced to sell. It was just excruciating, he says. Tariffs only hurt us. There was no thought process whatsoever. He continues, our labor is stolen, our lives are stolen, our families are broken, and it's all because we have politicians who are absolutely clueless to the reality of farming. Tom Geisel, who grows wheat and corn on his 3,000-acre farm in Larned, Kansas, said that the country has effectively imposed an embargo on its own crops. He called it the worst crisis American farmers have faced since the early 1980s. My biggest frustration is there's no light at the end of the tunnel. There's nothing out there giving me a glimmer of hope that commodity prices will increase substantially, Geisel said. The Chinese have zero reason to come to the table on commodities. Why would they want to do anything different? It's lowered the price of grains. If the stock market took that kind of a blip, there'd be people jumping out of buildings, said Geisel, vice president of the Kansas Farmers Union. San Diego, California dairy farmers are feeling the effects of the trade war with Mexico that started when President Donald Trump imposed tariffs on Mexico's steel and aluminum. In retaliation, Mexico in June imposed a series of tariffs on U.S. goods, such as pork, apples, potatoes, bourbon, and different types of cheese. Cheese requires thousands of gallons of milk to produce. The economic effect for local dairy farms has been brutal. The market in the last 2 weeks of June dramatically dropped, Frank Conan, owner of Conan Dairy, said. I am losing $1,400 a day, about $40,000 a month here in this dairy. The tariffs increase the price of milk coming from the United States, meaning more milk is staying in the local economy, and that's bad for business. For now, workers at Conan Dairy can relax. No job cuts have been contemplated so far, Conan said. We cannot do that, he said. The cows need to have their feed. They need to have their water. They need to be milked. I can't just stop milking them and come back in a week. Luke Ulrich, a farmer near Baldwin City, Kansas, anticipates a fairly decent corn and soybean crop this year. But his expenses are so high, and the prices he's getting for his crops and cattle are so low, he's budgeting less than $25,000 in income for the whole year. President Trump's tariffs are partly to blame for low grain prices. China retaliated against his tariffs by all but closing a giant export market for Ulrich's soybeans. I'd probably be lying if I said some of us aren't scratching our heads every once in a while, Ulrich says. I sometimes wonder if Trump didn't bite off a little more than he could chew. Then the Trump administration hurt demand for his corn by allowing dozens of oil refineries to sidestep their legal obligations to use billions of gallons of corn-based ethanol in gasoline blends. But Ulrich is not mad at Trump. He loves Trump's hands-off approach to environmental regulations, and he appreciates the $28 billion aid package that the U.S. Department of Agriculture has distributed to compensate farmers for what they are losing in export sales. And now a word from the Vice President of Agriculture and Rural Affairs for China, Han Jun. Han Jun, Vice Minister of Agriculture and Rural Affairs for China, said China's retaliatory tariffs on American products, the latest of which took effect on Saturday, June 1, 2019, now covered virtually all U.S. agricultural product exports to China, warning that U.S. farmers could lose the Chinese market for good. If the U.S. doesn't lift all additional tariffs levied on Chinese products, bilateral agricultural product trade between China and the U.S., including soybean trade, will never go back to normal, Han told the official Xinhua news agency. If the U.S. loses China's market, it will be very difficult for the U.S. to regain it. Han, who is also a top policymaker as deputy head of the Office of the Central Leading Group for Rural Affairs, said the 2 rounds of aid offered by U.S. President Donald Trump to American farmers would not be enough to cover their potential losses if they lost the Chinese market. In terms of the soybean trade, while China's imports from the United States had plunged, it could find ways to diversify its sources, including encouraging Chinese farmers to grow more of the crop and buying more from other countries, Han said.